We are slowly but surely getting towards the end of this first season. We have now reached the second half of the Last of Us series, and based off of everything we saw last week, they have simultaneously remained incredibly faithful to this video game while making some very, very notable deviations and changes to the source material. And I think for the most part, you and I have liked a lot of the changes that they've made. And last week's episode was explosive to say the least. So many things happened, and from an emotional standpoint, it certainly altered, I think, the trajectory of where we are following our characters as we get towards the end of this first season. But before we talk about the spoilers for this week and do a bit of a deeper dive and talk about the major events, just pass it over to you to start with your big picture overall thoughts. What did you think about episode 6 of The Last of Us?
I absolutely loved this episode, man. And it bounces in and out of things we've either seen in the game, between new things that are happening that didn't happen in the game. There's even some things from the second game that are in this episode, and it's done really just so well, man. Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, I think, have just found such a stride with this TV show, man. Because what's impressive about this episode is it's not super fast paced. It's not a ton going on here, but the acting chops, the tone, there's just so many things about this episode that I really enjoyed, man. And this episode goes to Pedro Pascal first and foremost. He's acting in this episode, man, and I think he really is encompassing what Joel is and what Joel is meant to be. And I really just loved every bit of it, man. It's an episode that they take the characters and they take, what Joel and Ellie are meant to be, and they take the moments that you can't take to spend time with in the video games and just do more with them. They sit down and talk about, just so much in this episode that made me feel like, yeah, that's what they would do if we had more time in the game, even. And even, Neil Druckmann was even saying in the podcast and stuff, there's things in this episode that they just couldn't do in the video game. And I love that they're taking the time to explore some of those smaller things here. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, man. Also, shout out to Bella Ramsey too, who also killed this episode. I think they just found their footing, man. And this is another one of those ones to me that the performances here are just so good that there's really no complaints, man. I love the pacing. I love the conversations being had. I love the attribution to the video game and sometimes lack thereof. It's just a good episode overall for me, man. So I enjoyed it.
I gotta agree. This was another incredible and fantastic installment into the series. They have just been further increasing my excitement for everything that we're seeing week to week, which is a really challenging thing to do when you have a series that not only is telling, to a certain extent, somewhat of an original story with some of these new additions that they're making, but something that does have such a loyal fan base, and many people are expecting this to play very, very closely to their experience in the video game. And I'm noticing so many conversations on social media where people are having these different experiences while also watching the same thing unfold every single week. And it's really fascinating, a fascinating experiment to watch those who played the game like you and I versus those who are entering into this world for the very first time. And as somebody who did play the game and is continuing to return to this show week to week, I'm just astounded at how much they've been able to achieve thus far within 6 episodes, how much they're able to hold my attention and keep me so invested into something, even though I know the outcome of it. I'm always
Mhm.
wondering on the side of me, like, well, maybe they might change this, and I might see some things that didn't happen in the game that could throw me off and present a new surprise, and then I see that they might stay more faithful to elements that I just couldn't have predicted. It's always just a nice experiment to undergo that type of experience every single week, and what they did here from a visual perspective, which I think this might be the most beautiful episode thus far, and an emotional perspective, everything that we had with the relationship building and the new characters that were introduced here and just the world building in addition to all of that stuff, they knocked it out of the park again. It's just a really great episode, and also a nice, again, I think an additional bridge episode similar to what we saw a couple of weeks ago. This is a nice bridge episode towards the final act. Now we're getting towards the closing chapters of this particular story, and I think that this, just like it did in the game, kind of sets up everything we're going to see in these final 3 episodes that are coming in a really, really impactful way. And I think that all the key pieces are in place right now to deliver a really emotional and profound experience that we're gonna get by the time episode 9 rolls around in a few weeks here. But it was great. I loved it and can't wait to talk about it more. So if you've not seen this week's episode of The Last of Us, this is your official spoiler warning. Go duck out and come back and listen to the rest of our conversation when you've had a chance to check it out. And so I kind of want to start off with how we started off with the episode, and that's the fact that we're picking up 3 months after the events of what we saw last week with Henry and Sam. Unfortunately, we had to kind of relive that experience at the top of this episode, seeing the death of Sam at the hands of his brother, and then also seeing Henry eventually commit suicide, which is just so disturbing and still bothers me so much to watch that scene because it was just so terrible to witness and experience that again from the game to now the live action series. But we pick up 3 months after that, and we get a true passage of time, maybe the most significant passage of time we've gotten across this show thus far. And because this is a bit of a truncated experience, maybe compared to the video game, where you can maybe duck off and do some side things and take your time and experience the world a little bit more. We don't necessarily have that luxury with the live action TV show. So I find that in the opening moments of this episode, we're sort of left to fill in a few of the gaps that are insinuated based on the relationship that we see established with Joel and Ellie. What we see at the top of this episode is a Joel who's a little bit more communicative with Ellie. He's opened up a little bit more. He's very much more willing to answer questions that she has. You can tell that they've grown closer now than they have before. And I think that that's partially due to just the acceptance of this mission from Joel, but also just to what they experienced, which was an emotionally traumatic, turn of events. And now that's kind of bonded them closer. But in addition to that, there's also some underlying things that are wrong with Joel that we'll cover soon enough here. But just kind of want to get your thoughts on how they communicated this passage of time in the opening moments here, because the game similarly is a game that takes place across multiple seasons. And I think we're finally getting that illustrated here. We're firmly in the winter time now when we pick up in this week's episode. So what did you think about just the way that they communicated that particular idea?
Yeah, it's just one of those things that is going to happen. I think in an adaptation where we're faced with what, 9 hours of content versus the 20 hours of content in a video game. And I think, it the way they're doing it just makes a ton of sense to me, because I think they're skipping time that, again, makes sense for us as, again, people who are playing the game versus people who are now watching these stories unfold. And what's so interesting is I bet you there's not a one person who didn't play the game who was watching this is like, dang, did they skip this section or did they skip this thing? And I think that's almost just as important, as well as the people who, like us, who have played the game, where we can recognize that and be like, dang, how do we get here? Or not how do we get here, but we know the in-betweens. And I think it's cool that both things can exist at the same time and for both parties to feel comfortable with that. And so I think that's impressive. So yeah, man, I think those skips make a ton of sense. Also, at the end of the day, we just have an agenda. We have things that we know we have to get to. We even know what next episode is going to look like at this point. And after that, 2 episodes left after that, right? And so it's kind of crazy to think about. We're nearing the end, and so there are going to be small little time jumps that we have to, and humps that we have to get over. But I really like the way it's conveyed. I think it makes sense. They haven't cut out anything that everyone's like, oh, look at that thing's not here. Instead, it's like the more welcome jumps. And that's perfect as any game is. That I will claim that The Last of Us is one of the most perfect games I think I've played. There was always a thing that you can cut out. There's always something that can be changed or taken out. There's also always something about a game that may not be the most perfect or most useful thing at the time. So I think it makes sense here. And even sometimes TV shows do things better than games. So it makes sense here to me. I'm glad they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, we've traversed a lot of area at this point. The series starts off essentially in Boston, and then we eventually make our way to Kansas City. If you know anything about geography, those two places are not close to each other. It would take quite a while to get from Boston to KC, and from KC to Wyoming is also not a short trip. And so the fact that we time jump 3 months, and get ourselves firmly into winter makes complete sense. But I just love that they were able to allow the characters to grow off screen, and we can just sort of assume, some of these things might have happened. We can assume that Joel and Ellie have just naturally talked more. They really are kind of the only two people that they could talk to, unless they've run
Mm-hmm.
into a few strangers here and there. But I love that by the time we do pick up this episode, you can just kind of see, yeah, these two have grown closer. They don't still see eye to eye on everything, and of course, like Ellie is still going to get on Joel's nerves occasionally, and he's going to look at her like, yeah, stop being rude. But you can just naturally see that their relationship has grown and developed in a significant way compared to where we've been in previous weeks. What's also interesting is the fact that they come across some new characters that are not a part of the game, but these two characters in particular are trying to inform them of their whereabouts because Joel and Ellie, as we live in this post-apocalyptic society within the series, they don't necessarily know where they are all the time. They have an idea, they know that they're going west, but you could end up lost very easily just because technology is not what it used to be. And so they run into these two people who are a couple, Marlon and Florence, and they kind of warn them about what might lie ahead if you go further west. And it's a really foreboding message. They essentially warn them like, don't go that way. There's nothing out that way but death. If you know somebody out there, if somebody you love has basically created a life for themselves in that particular region of the country, they're
Mm-hmm.
probably dead. And so this signals something to Joel in that moment that says, wow, Tommy, my brother, who I'm looking for, might be dead. And we see Joel essentially undergo a panic attack, which we have not experienced before. That was not really an element in the game that they explored.
Mm-hmm.
This is something new that they're adding. And then when we fast forward a little bit more and they finally get towards Wyoming, they're ambushed by this mysterious group of people, which we find out is led by Maria, who is Tommy's wife. But there's a really, really tense moment where they're essentially examining Joel and Ellie. They're held at gunpoint and they send a dog to go sniff them out to make sure that they're not infected. And we know Ellie does have a bite mark. And so a dog could potentially smell that, but she's also immune. So you don't really know what's going to happen. And Joel, though he doesn't have a panic attack in that moment, he just completely freezes up. He does not have any sort of emotional reaction. He can't do anything necessarily. You can see the fear on his face, but what's he
Mm-hmm.
going to do? He's held at gunpoint. He can't go save her like we normally would associate him with doing so. So it's just like the worst possible situation to be in where this little girl's life is likely on the line. And thank goodness the dog is like completely friendly and starts to play with her. But all of this just signals just the changes that Joel has undergone in this time period. Again, this 3 months that we have not seen, but we're left to assume probably a lot has happened. And in addition to that, Joel has developed this potential disorder that he now has to live with, these panic attacks, again, which he did not have in the video game. This is sort of a new addition, but I think you can attribute it to a lot of things: his age, what he's experienced, the fear that he's just living with,
Mm-hmm.
being closely tied to Ellie. What did you think about this new addition, this condition that he now has to sort of overcome and deal with?
It's I love this, I think, addition because it's so accurate, I think, to the life that Joel has been living. I think it makes sense for everything that he's gone to have these somewhat panic attacks, which again, like you said, it's probably from PTSD and all these things that he's had to go through, especially in that moment where he doesn't, he's talking to Tommy about it. He was like, I don't know what that dog was going to do to her or but I couldn't do anything in that moment. And I think, again, this all stems from, the moment that he had to go through with Sarah, man. He even, they were literally deer in the headlights at that moment. He feels like he's lost so many times that I think in that moment, he it's funny. I feel like we've seen two sides of it. I feel like there's one side of it where it's when they were first leaving the city, the QZ, and he beats up the guard for Ellie. And now there's just a different kind of, I think, attachment to her that makes that moment almost feel similar to when he lost Sarah. And I think one of the deepest things about Last of Us One, it's very small, but the idea that when the day he lost Sarah, his watch that Sarah got him stopped, and I think by that same token, that's how he feels in that moment. He's just stopped. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know. I don't know. Of course he doesn't want to lose Ellie in this moment, but he also doesn't want to slip up and mess something up, or so many things are going through his head. In fact, it's probably a mini panic attack he's even having in that moment, man. And so I really do love the addition that they have of Joel here and not being able to come up with the idea or the words or be able to move in that moment, because he's again stuck in this he's reliving the past in this deer in the headlights moment. of not knowing what to do about somebody he cares about who could potentially be in danger. And I think it's just so accurate.
Yeah, no doubt, because one of the things that Joel did not have to necessarily live with for 20 years, he certainly experienced grief, and I think we can assume based off of his character traits and the characterization in this show is that he compartmentalized that whole incident with his daughter Sarah and he just locked it away and
Mm-hmm.
chose not to revisit it and kept himself closed off to the world. But now with Ellie coming into his life in such a profound way, he's opened himself up to be more vulnerable and to connect with her on a deeper level. Now there's actual legitimate fear that he has to deal with because she has grown to become the surrogate daughter for him. And this is, something that they certainly explored in the video game that they're taking to another level within the show. And living with that fear and living with the idea that he could lose somebody again that's close to him, because the first panic attack it got triggered by the idea that Tommy might be gone, which is another loved one,
Mm-hmm.
somebody that he really adores and loves and would hate to lose. Obviously, that's essentially his only other family, his only other real family. And then the thought of Ellie possibly being taken out by the guard dog or by the guards that ambushed them, it created a similar reaction, not physically, but emotionally. Again, you can just read it on his face that he sees that he has everything to lose now because he's let this person become close to him, which he's been willing to do, but that has obvious repercussions because I think for somebody to just lock away all those emotions for 20 years, now,
Mm-hmm.
at the age of, I think 56 he is by the time we get here, that's going to come back and you have to deal with that in some form or fashion. And it's coming out in a really unfortunately kind of violent physical way within these panic attacks. Because if you've ever experienced a panic attack, a lot of people say that it feels just like a heart attack. It feels like you might be dying, and that's
Mm-hmm.
that's terrible. That's a really really rough thing to go through. And so we're seeing Joel try to reckon with that and try to understand and deal with that as well. After all of that occurs, we do finally get the reunion between Tommy and Joel, which we've been awaiting since they first really split in that first episode. Tommy, of course, is being portrayed by Gabriel Luna, fantastic actor. And that moment of just seeing them reconnect for the first time and who knows how long, it was really special to see. I think you can just see for the first time in a long time, Joel just kind of allow himself to just open up and love his brother and to accept him and embrace him. And then you also simultaneously experience Tommy, who is very much shocked and surprised. He didn't know that Joel was going
Mm-hmm.
to show up at his front door like that. And so I'm sure he's dealing with the shock of the situation, but also the happiness to see his brother again for what we assume has been a long time. How did you feel about, these two brothers finally coming back together and having that moment?
Man, I think one of the most interesting aspects of all of this is Joel as the big brother, very much expected to find Tommy in a place of, I don't know, neediness, right, and of help. But he pulls up to Jackson and to see Tommy living his best life, I think is really different for Joel with all the things that they've been through. And so I think that embrace was also somewhat of a sigh of relief for Joel to be like, dang, I've my brother's kind of doing great here. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, he's actually thriving. And so and for Tommy, it's just to see Joel alive, right? They've lived a crazy previous life before all of this. So I'm sure in the back of Tommy's head, there was any moment for Tommy where I know he could be like, man, my brother could be dead. Like, I really don't know where he lives. And so I think they're both going through different emotions in that moment. But of course, like you said, they're just very happy to see each other. And it was a cool moment, man. Like, I can only imagine after seeing, your sibling from umpteenth years, however many years, how it would be to see them alive in these conditions of how crazy the world is. And especially after you just got held gunpoint and dog to go back to the city and be like, oh shoot, this is my brother's place. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. It's something about that too. That's like, oh, I'm safe now. Like before, I'm sure he felt the danger, but to see that he's safe in that moment, I think is another side relief for really both of them. And so yeah, it was just really cool to see that moment.
Yeah, and really incredible performances from both Gabriel Luna and Pedro Pascal because you can just feel this episode is entitled Kin, so you can naturally feel the kinship between these two.
Mm-hmm.
They actually feel like real brothers, and that's likely because they've worked together before as well. But I think you just naturally feel that emotion between those two because God knows they both have dealt with really, really dark stuff. And Joel, I think, has unfortunately gotten the worst of it, but we can't forget that Sarah is also it's also Tommy's niece, you know. So that was a tremendous
Hmm.
loss for him as well. We can't forget and take that lightly. And he's also experienced further loss that we find out a little bit later in this episode. But I just love seeing that warm embrace, because you do get that in the game. You do get that moment where they see each other and they're so happy. But the fact that we can, you know, further elevate it to what you said, to see that, like, yeah, Tommy is actually like thriving in this place. You know, he's doing really, really
Hmm.
well, and that could perhaps rub off on Joel. Hopefully, I think that that's the idea, that maybe this life that he shows Joel visibly, like, look what you can have. You know, we can create something here together, and it can be fruitful and it can be worthwhile. You know, you don't necessarily have to live in darkness, even though you did go through, you know, possibly the worst situation that a parent could ever go through, right? And so I think that that was just a really integral moment. In addition to Tommy, as I mentioned, we also meet a new character called Maria, who is, you know, again in the video game, but a new character to the show, and she's played by Rutina Wesley, who I was just so glad to
Yeah.
see. If you've watched True
Hmm.
Blood before, you know the Rutina Wesley
Yes,
was
sir.
main cast members of that show. So it was just great to see her here. And we find out that her and Tommy are married. This is, you know, sort of a marriage that they have between the two. And Joel finds out in a really funny way, because he didn't know that they were together. That's also kind of another thing to see how long they've been away from each other. Like, oh wow, you
Hmm.
got married, bro. Like I didn't realize that. You know, I wish I could have pulled up to the wedding. And they have a really, I think, a really interesting conversation to catch up, you know, between the four: Ellie, Joel, Tommy, and of course Maria, to just kind of see where everything is. And they're also showing them around this town, you know, that they've been able to build in Jackson, Wyoming. That's the location that we're in now. And it's just wild to see, you know, them bring this to life on screen, because in the game, we don't necessarily go towards this section of Jackson, Wyoming. They
Hmm.
mostly focus on that dam, which was alluded to earlier in the episode, which was a gorgeous visual. But here we can see a community again that's thriving, that's living, that's been able to establish something that is really safe, really protected from the outside world and from the infected. Everybody here is just enjoying a normal life for the most part. I mean, they have movie nights, for goodness sakes. They have banks, and they got livestock and electricity and nice food, and a bar is in there. You know, Joel is able to like take a quick shot with his brother. So I mean, they're just enjoying kind of the fruits of their labor to be able to establish a place that is sort of closed off from the outside world, and they've managed to make it sustainable. And we get all this information from Maria, who says, like, you know, it's basically kind of a form of communism. We have a, you know, basically a group of people who were elected by the people that all come together and decide upon a few things, but mostly we trade and we share resources. And so they've managed to make it work for a decent amount of time, I would imagine. What did you think about just seeing this town that's located in Jackson, Wyoming, come to life? And for the first time really in the show, since we've come to the post-apocalyptic stage of everything,
Hmm.
to see a place that does exist where people can live comfortably and be happy to a certain extent, all considered with the circumstances that exist on the outside of those gates.
Yeah, man. And it was really good to see, because this show had nothing but all of the communities we've seen up until now are crazy, right? It's Fedra mixed with the people from Kansas City people, and it just too much going on. This is the first time where we actually see at least some form of peace, right? I really love that moment between actually Maria and Tommy, where where they're like, "Oh, this is a commune." He was like, and they were like, "Oh, it makes you a communist." He was like, "Wait, what? What are you saying?" And it's really cool though, because when you do think of a commune, to me, for some reason, I always think a bunch of plants and flowers, and I don't know, something about a commune that drives me there. But it really is probably the closest view, I think, at peace that we've seen in this world, in this very, very dark world, man, where there are animals. They got stables with horses, there's sheep running around and lambs. And what's even crazier is later in the episode, you know, we see the monkeys, but they're wild, right? It's different when you see like domestic animals that people are actually, you know, feeding off of. And so I think I just think it's a cool moment, man, because it's in a dark show. Again, there's always the balance, right? Where is the happiness? You know, I kind of talked about before how Ellie a lot of times does provide like the brightness in a lot of episodes, but here it's really Jackson serving as a character to provide the happiness here. And I think that's a really important thing in a show like this, where are a little over the halfway point. It's like, man, is there anywhere out there that looks happy? Of course, we knew Jackson existed, but I can imagine viewers like who have never played the game, like, what the heck is this place? is this are they really leaving? You know what I'm saying? Like, are they need to stay? What are they talking about? And so yeah, I love the hope that there is people can get married. I love the hope that there can be people can have kids. I love the hope that there's a movie theater in this joint. You know what I'm saying? Like, what? I don't even, first of all, I don't even know where they got these movies from. It's kind of crazy. But you know, it's the fact that it exists, man. I think there's the little small beacon, I think, of sunshine, a little beacon of hope is kind of embedded within Jackson, Wyoming, man. And it's just really nice to see again in a world that's so dark.
No doubt. And they introduced this a little late in the game. I think most shows would try to pull this type of trigger earlier to keep it feeling somewhat safe or to give that hope and optimism to viewers. But again, we're more than halfway through the series, and this is really the first sign where there is a normal society in this world. And we've come across militias and resistances and just a lot of murder and killing from people who have just like tried to essentially step on the next man next to them or the next woman next to them. And so finally we've come to a place which is just, it feels safe, compared to the rest of the world. But the movie theater tripped me out because everything ended in 2003. After that, there's no more movies being made. So you have,
ooh, that's sad.
You have a limited amount of cinematic history to work with. You have the majority of cinematic history to work with, but you can't watch anything after 2003. You want to know what came out the very next year in '04 that they'll never have any sort of notice about. They'll never be able to witness some of the greatness that came out in '04. I'll give you just a couple quick names. The Incredibles. They'll never get to
Oh my God.
They'll never get to see The Incredibles. Imagine that, a world without that family. That really sucks. Spider-Man 2, they'll never get to see that. Man on Fire, a personal favorite as well. They won't get to see that. Collateral with Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx, they'll never see that greatness. 2004 was a pretty decent year, and then think about it after that, there's all the stuff you can drop in 05 and 06 and 07. So
they didn't have to see Catwoman though.
Well, man, mercy on their souls for not having to witness that. Oh, sheesh. I don't even know what to say about that one. Thank God. Yeah, they dodged a bullet with Catwoman for sure. But that was a cool moment to see that they did have a movie theater. I have a question for you. There's a moment in the cafeteria where they are eating and catching up. And again, Joel is starting to get information about Tommy and Maria and really understanding the situation around them. And while Ellie is just chowing down on food feverishly because she has not had probably a proper meal ever in her life, there's a girl off in the distance staring at them while they're having a conversation. And Ellie looks up and is like, "Hey, what are you looking at?" The girl quickly runs away. She didn't want to be noticed. And they had a quick exchange there. Without getting into spoilers, without getting into the details of what that might mean, I'll just ask you, and fans, if you've not played the game, please don't look into this. Don't spoil it for yourself. Was that Dina that she saw in that cafeteria?
I think so, because again, no spoilers here, but a lot of this episode, the way we see Jackson is definitely the future. We hadn't seen this really in the first game. So yeah, a lot of this is from the second game, low key. So part of me wants to say it's just so weird the way they're weaving it right now that it's hard to tell. But because it was so specific right now, I'm gonna say yes. Like there's no doubt in my mind that that's exactly who it is.
Yeah, because also like why else included? It's just like
exactly.
Oh, Ellie sees a random person and tells them
it's
to get
like
away.
No way.
There's no reason to just have that there.
Especially what's about to happen next episode. Which is yes,
that's what I was thinking. I was like,
a little setup.
Yeah, it ties directly into that stuff, and I think if people decide to do like a deeper dive in exploration, you'll be like, oh, okay, so we can see the narrative through line that would exist there, and perhaps even next episode, they might point back to what happened in this episode in that moment, that quick exchange. That could happen. I don't know, but perhaps they will. But as you said, Jackson, Wyoming becomes a focal point of the second game, certainly. I do want to circle back to Joel, but more specifically Joel and Ellie in this episode, because there are some important developments that happen between those two. I think we talked a little bit about Joel and some of the physical ailments that he's now dealing with that are really being triggered by the emotional weight that he's now carrying in his life. But Ellie, on the opposite side of that, she of course is, I think, experiencing many of these same feelings, just in a different way, through a different prism. Ellie what I found in this episode, which they don't really allude to in the game that much, and I think that they've expanded upon this idea now in the series, is that Ellie really looks at Joel as her protector, so much so
Mm-hmm.
that any other circumstance or situation that would change that dynamic, she is not for it. She's like, I don't want to be with anybody else. I don't want to go anywhere with anybody else. You feel invincible to me. You feel the most protective and the most safe for me when we go out
Mm.
into the strange, very scary world. And I don't want to go elsewhere, because what we see happen is Joel finally reach a place again where he is just so emotionally distraught and dealing with so much that he's having visions of possibly seeing Sarah in this town. He sees the
Mm-hmm.
girl with a similar hairstyle that
Yep.
reminds him of his daughter, and he has another panic attack because of that. So that fear has come up to the surface so much for him that he is willing to just walk away from this journey, hand Ellie off to Tommy, and say, like, hey man, you take her. You're younger. You know these routes better than I do. I'm confident that you can get her to where she needs to go and finish this mission. I don't feel like I can do it anymore. And Ellie, on the opposite side of that, she's just not for it. She ends up eavesdropping into their conversation, and she hears all of that stuff, and she's really feeling the most safe with Joel. How did you feel about just that development that we see between these two? That there's a quick moment where they try to separate, they try to go their different paths, but they're just they're just naturally linked together for pretty much all time at this point. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's no separating them.
Yeah, it's in this ridiculous, again, just post-apocalyptic world, man. It's very rare that you're gonna find two people from two different walks of life who are as similar as Joel and Ellie are, and unfortunately, their experiences is what makes them so similar, right? Where they both have lost so much, and Joel is so afraid, I think, of losing that in Ellie, so much so that, again, when he sees that girl that kind of looks like Sarah, I think he's not only afraid, like, oh my god, that person looks like my daughter, what is that? But I think he's having like a realization of that's what he could have had, of that because he sees her with a child, like, dang, what if that was my daughter or my grandchild? Oh, this is a place where family exists. And now that it almost feels like his conversation with Tommy, right, where he's talking about loss and all these other things. I feel like we'll talk about the conversation in a second, but there's a moment where it just feels like he's conflating Sarah and Ellie together at some points in time, right? And he doesn't want to feel that loss ever again that can come from that. And so I think it's like it's a push and pull thing with these two characters, man. It's like it's like they're meant to be. The universe has put them in each other's laps, in each other's paths. And as much as Joel is like, I can't do this for you, the universe is like, boy, if you don't get your ass back in that ring, you know what I'm saying? That's literally what Ellie is saying. Like, Ellie is like, you tripping, right? Like, you cannot be serious right now. And I think Ellie has felt, she feels the gravitational pull, of course, in a protector kind of way. She is, I mean, to me, straight up, that's like, hey, I know you may not be my dad, but you are my protector. And in some ways, though, that could be a gray area. And it's just very interesting to hear them talk the way they talk to each other. Because at the end, it's almost like I know this is a weird comparison. It's a very bad comparison, but it's almost like a one of those couples that's been together for like 10 years. And you're like, oh, we broke up. We like, no, y'all didn't. We know y'all didn't break up. Why are y'all talking like this? Y'all just gonna get back together the next day. But
Sure.
Joel and Ellie very much have that relationship with each other, where all this PTSD, all these things are coming to Joel, and it's just like it's just a moment, it's just a moment for him where it's like, ooh, I don't know if I can do this. But we know at the end of the day that he's gonna come around and be Ellie's protector at the end of the day. So it's really crazy how dependent they are becoming on of each other, man, and how all, again, their experiences are making them so similar and, even more importantly, inseparable in these moments, man.
That leads us to what I think are probably the two most poignant and powerful moments of the episode, and they are two conversations. The first is the conversation that Joel has with his brother Tommy, where he confides in him and he talks to him about the dreams and the nightmares that he's been having, and these feelings of loss and these feelings of fear in which he does not feel adequate enough to protect Ellie, and he wants Tommy to essentially leave his life. here in Jackson,
Mhm.
Wyoming to escort Ellie to Salt Lake City, Utah, which would be a big sacrifice for Tommy because he has a baby, on the way. Like he's about to be a father. And then the following conversation comes when Joel finally meets Ellie, and this is the big moment that I think a lot of fans have been waiting for, which is taken straight from the game, and that's the confrontation between Ellie and Joel, where they kind of they have a reckoning with each other because now Ellie has become aware that Joel did indeed have a daughter. She finds that information out earlier in the episode from Maria. And this conversation in the bedroom that Ellie is sleeping in for the night, it's almost a one for one from the video game. It's a very contentious conversation where Joel essentially just tells her, like, you're not my daughter. You're no daughter of mine. You never will be. And they're gonna part ways and go their separate routes on this journey. And so it's a very emotional moment again that I think a lot of
Mhm.
us who played the game were waiting on because it's one of the more memorable scenes. They changed the way in which we got there, but in terms of the
Right.
execution itself and how they delivered it, it was pretty much the exact same. I feel like Pedro Pascal with these two performances, he just went ahead and claimed the Emmy already. He just said like,
Yes.
yeah, that's gonna be mine. The best actor in a television series drama, that'll be mine come September because this is what they're gonna submit to that award show. I have
Yeah.
no doubt about it because I
Hmm.
I I find it hard to imagine that he might deliver a performance better than this. But how did you feel about those two conversations and just the way that they evolved from Joel kind of reaching his breaking point and then just a few moments later, he becomes very defensive and very upset and angry at Ellie and then takes it out on her, essentially.
Yeah. Pascal, man. Wow. I've seen him in a lot of things. It's something about this role, man, where he's just bringing it out. You know what I'm saying? We've seen him in numerous things, but this is like not the first time, but this is just one of the times I feel like I'm like, this dude is acting. You know what I'm saying? I think people understand what I'm saying as well. But man, these are moments I think that make the game because these are moments that really don't happen in other games. Like, to be honest, a lot of video games are kind of balls to the wall. This is the story, and they never get this deep. They never
Mhm.
get this character driven. They never get this heart to heart one-on-one moments in video games just don't happen. And this is why, people do claim The Last of Us is one of the greatest games ever, because you're really playing a movie. You really are. And so the conversation between, him and Ellie, well, first him and Tommy, man, it's the things that he's saying is it's some of the best quotes now in the TV show, that I've seen. I was so afraid. I'm not who I was. I'm weak. You know what I'm saying? Like, he said, I'm failing in my sleep. It's all I do. It's all I've ever done is fail her again and again. And, you just heard me talk about me saying, is he conflating Sarah in Ellie in this moment? Because he just says her. He says, it's all I've ever done is fail her. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They never really clarify it in that moment. And I think it's so interesting because it could apply to both. What if he's having dreams about both? What if one night it's about, because he almost says he doesn't even remember say what the dreams are about, but he remembers the feeling. And I think that's even more important in this moment when you start to talk about the similarities between Sarah and Ellie. It's the feeling. I have this young girl in my care and I don't feel like that I can protect them. And it's just really good work that Pascal's doing here, man. It really is tremendous. And then we get to the conversation between him and Ellie. And I actually love that this is like such a quick follow up because this is like the definition of drama. You know what I'm saying? It goes from one conversation to be like, Ellie, I'm sorry, I can't. He has a therapy session with him and Tommy. And one, for Tommy to even say yes to that, that's a brother. Like, anybody else in the world would have been like, hell no, I got a wife, I got an unborn baby who's coming. There is absolutely no way I'm going to do this. But because Tommy and Joel have shared those experiences and shared that love, Tommy says yes. And I think that's crazy in itself. But for the follow up of Joel having to go tell Ellie the news that Tommy's going to take you in the morning is like, there's no way. Like, are you serious? You've brought me all this way and done all these things. You're the only person that I've ever seen that can protect me. Like Ellie says, you're one of the only people that have never left me. ever. And now you're telling me this is the moment you're gonna leave me after all we've been through. And so it's really good TV, man. It is. It of course it's a good game, but this is also really good TV. And I'm this is like the moments where I'm like, damn, I'm glad y'all made this a TV show.
Because also, one of the things about the video game, which, it's fine, but Joel oftentimes was kind of presented as this near invincible protagonist. I think that there were a lot of things in that game that happened, especially in the first one towards the end, where it's like, yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
probably shouldn't have made it out of that situation alive, but he just kind of mows through people. He's very proficient with weapons and in his hands, and I think he becomes kind of a machine at certain points throughout the video game, which again is fine, but you can't really translate that into the real world. This is still a
Mm-hmm.
man at the end of the day. And what we're
Right.
seeing now more than ever is just all of those human qualities come out of him because Joel, he's slipping. If we're really being honest about it, like he's lost a lot of his hearing. He fell asleep on watch, while they were supposed to be, sort of sleeping and Ellie was supposed to be resting. He was supposed to be up watching her and he fell asleep. And she's
Mm-hmm.
she's already up with the rifle and now he's, just kind of breaking down in front of his brother in this really emotional way at the thought of failing again to protect somebody that he loves, that he's grown to love. And so we're just kind of seeing this man deal with that and come to grips with that before ultimately just getting the night's sleep, maybe just really thinking on it and resting on everything that's ahead of them and allowing Ellie to have her own choice in the matter. Because when we see them the next morning, he does tell her like, you should at least choose what your outcome is going to be. So pick me or Tommy to go on this journey. She has no hesitation about it at all. She immediately picks him because she perceives him as invincible. And so I think that that's how they communicate that idea from the video game. And so we see them continue their journey. They do eventually reach Salt Lake City, which again, this is a part of the game in which they come to this medical facility in order to find the fireflies and to continue the journey to find this immunity or to extrapolate Ellie's blood to create some sort of immune medicine for the disease that they're dealing with. And unfortunately, these raiders eventually take over the grounds and come and attack both Joel and Ellie. And as they're trying to get away, Joel is mortally wounded. He's essentially shivved in his lower abdomen, and we see him by the end of this collapse, and he's looking like he's going to bleed out here. So it's a really dramatic, intense scene, and a lot of this is ripped again straight from the video game. When they go to the medical facility, nobody's there. They go inside the building. The monkeys are just running
Mm-hmm.
around, and all of this stuff is happening and lifted directly from the video game. And they are attacked as well. The way in which he's impaled is a little bit different in the game. It's in the game, I mean, he would have probably died from the way that it happened in the video game. Here, it's a little bit more realistic, but it does take him out. And so now Ellie, her biggest fear has come to life. It's manifested. She's now alone. Essentially, he Joel has not died yet, but she is alone in this very moment. So all the fear you can kind of see is taking over her in this moment as she's trying to revive him. How do you feel about the way that this, all closed out, and then also just, sort of the outlook for next week's episode, which is pointing to this relationship that Ellie has with Riley. Next week's episode is called The Left Behind, and if you did not play the video game, that is a downloadable content package that was released about a year after the initial game.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an entirely new story that's going to be introduced next week in the form of a flashback. But what do you feel about just sort of the bridge that they made between the final moments of this episode and then what we'll see next week?
What I absolutely loved it because the end of the episode where Joel falls off the horse, Ellie is trying to figure out what to do with Joel is literally how Last of Us Left Behind starts. That is I was like, all they doing is beat for beat. I was literally watching it like, oh, this is actually perfect. They're really tying this in really well with what we expect next week to be. So I absolutely loved it, man. I also love the pain in Bella Ramsey's eyes or the fear in Bella Ramsey's eyes, in Ellie's eyes when Joel gets hurt, man, saying, I can't do this without you. It's another one of those moments. I'm like, y'all really showing up. That's why, you know what I'm saying? Like you said, they try to knock on the doors. These Emmys, man, they trying to knock on the door. And I just love to see it. It's making for a great television series. And I also love really the action that happens before this because like, I can imagine a lot of people that didn't know what was about to go down and how fast it went down though. That was like 5 minutes in which he gets stabbed and she's just like, get on the horse, Joe. And I was like, dang, I'm really glad they're doing this. So just kudos to all involved for being able, I think, to tie this in the way that they are, because the difference between this and the video game is you got to download the whole thing in order to play to even see a lot of this stuff in the game. You know what I'm saying? But they're making it seamless in this TV show. It's like, oh, this is where it fits in. I can even imagine some people who never played Left Behind, who played the original game, being like, oh, is this where this is tying in? Like, I really like the way they're connecting it. And so yeah, I appreciate it. And kudos to the team for the way they're connecting it.
Yeah, because even in the Left Behind story, there are some parallels in which the location of where we are in this story play a factor into that story that they tell between Ellie and Riley, which we'll see come to light next week. But I was also just really tense during this moment of the episode because I was sitting there and it's like it's so quiet, and in the game it's really
Too
quiet
quiet.
too, and you just wonder
Mm-hmm.
like is somebody gonna pop out the corner? Like are we supposed to like brace ourselves? But they didn't do that. They kind of held it off right into those final moments, but. It shall certainly be a very, very emotional episode 7 next week. I can assure you all that. But folks, those
Mm-hmm.
are all of our thoughts on episode 6 of The Last of Us. Last of Us, excuse me. If you've checked out this week's episode, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.